The One with the Yeti is the 6th episode of the 5th season of Friends. This is directed by Gary Halvorson, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I talk about the episode and share some thoughts. Sometimes I will go through the episodes chronologically, but today I'm going to talk about each part of the narrative in turn. There's not a tremendous amount to say about most of it, apart from the part that focuses on Ross. So we'll come back to Ross at the end, but first of all, we have a tiny bit of movement with Monica and Chandler, because the opening scene sees them making out in Joey and Chandler's apartment, and this is kind of the first time where they get to do that freely without worrying about being caught, at least by Joey, because Joey knows. We don't really get any further movement with that in this episode. That makes perfect sense because the previous few episodes have focused quite a bit on that, but it's nice to have a little step forward with their part of the relationship. Phoebe's mother has sent her a mink coat, and in the episode she deals with the dilemma of finding the mink coat really comfortable and really stylish, and also the fact that it's made of mink. And the conversation she has with the squirrel I thought was adorable. And I think ultimately what happened with this made a lot of sense. It's not the most fascinating part of the narrative, but it's nice to have a little bit of focus on Phoebe as well that isn't about the pregnancy, because pretty much everything that is focused on Phoebe over the last season, understandably to some extent, has been about the babies. So it's nice to have something that's just a little shift from that. Not the most interesting, but it works well enough. And ultimately, I'm pleased that she didn't swap it out with her orange coat, because that orange coat becomes quite iconic pretty soon, but more on that when we get there. The title of the episode refers to the fact that Monica and Rachel were in storage, and it's quite dark, and they see what they think is a Yeti, because, of course, why would that not be your first thought? And it turns out that this is actually Danny, played by George Newbern, who has been away for a while, and he's just moved into one of the apartments, and he and Rachel seem to hit it off quite well. It's not the most developed in this particular episode, but it's interesting enough, and I guess the small mystery of wondering who this person was relatively fascinating. And then we have the main narrative. And as somebody who doesn't like Emily, I find that this is both frustrating and satisfying. Ross is getting rid of everything he owns, and this is basically because Emily thinks that everything is going to remind him of Rachel. They're going to remind her of Rachel. So Emily thinks new furniture. I don't completely disagree with that. As long as your furniture's not brand new or anything, then, selling it to people for a discount can help out other people, and then you can get new things that you both own. I think that could be a really great thing. But obviously the motivation for this isn't great. Gunther, however, is very happy about this because he overhears Ross saying this in Central Perk and decides that he'll take it all. And then things escalate. It turns out Emily wants Ross to move to another apartment. And they could have resolved that by saying Ross was locked into a lease for however many months. But again, I'm not completely against moving into a new apartment when you get married, because then you're kind of on equal footing. Everything is new to everybody, and I think that that's not the end of the world. However, it does get worse. Rachel comes home and Ross is there and they're having dinner, and Ross tells Rachel he wants her to stay and have dinner with them. And Rachel says, okay, fine, I'll stay. And I love the fact that Ross is trying to show that actually he doesn't need to not be around her, particularly now since Emily's not actually there yet. And Emily phones, and Ross puts her on speakerphone to say hello to everybody, and she says, who am I speaking to? And Joey says that he doesn't know who is there, but he knows who isn't there, and that's Rachel. And Emily said the first of a few things that made me feel sick. She said, Ross knows better than that by now. How dare she? She is talking down to Ross. She is trying to control Ross. Ross knows better than to disobey her request? Her order? How disgusting. What a horrible person. And then, obviously, Ross realises that this is a horrible thing for her to be saying, and he says, you know what, Rachel is actually here. And they go out onto the balcony, and Ross tells Emily that she should just come to New York. They'll sort it out when they get there. And Emily says, I'll feel better when I'm there and I can know where you are all the time. Strike two, Emily, you're disgusting. She's controlling, she is horrible, she doesn't care at all about how Ross feels. Not once. Granted, it's kind of his fault because he said Rachel's name, but not once has she considered Ross's feelings. And I hate her so much. And Ross says, quite understandably, this marriage is never going to work if you don't trust me. And Emily says that she can't trust him. And on the one hand, that's fair enough. If she can't trust him, I don't think that that's an unreasonable response, because he did say Rachel's name at the one point when he shouldn't have done. But at the same time, not trusting somebody doesn't mean that you then get to manipulate them and control them, and that's exactly what she's doing. So as much as I'm sure Ross doesn't want this to be the case, I don't think they should be married. I don't think they should proceed with this relationship, because the alternative is Emily controlling Ross and demanding to know where he is all the time, and that's not a healthy marriage. So I feel like this was never, ever going to work. But I'm glad that Ross has realised this. I don't want to see Ross unhappy, of course, but at the same time, Emily's not a good person. We then get a little bit of comedy at the end of that scene, though, where the gang ask Ross if there's anything that they can do to help him, and he says, you can help me get my furniture back from Gunther, which I thought was pretty funny, because Gunther's obviously bought all of the furniture that Rachel has touched and sat on. Sounds slightly creepy when I say it out loud like that, but it's a nice bit of comedy to lift the mood a bit. I don't like seeing Ross hurt, I don't like seeing Ross upset, but I really cannot stand Emily. She's not a nice person. Again, I understand her not trusting Ross, but there are ways of dealing with that, and controlling him is not the way to do that. So glad that their marriage is finally perceived to be over. But obviously, it's unfortunate that Ross has to go through this difficult time. We do get some pretty exciting episodes coming up, though, particularly with Monica and Chandler, but more on that when we get there. For now, I can say that the one with the Yeti is a pretty decent episode, definitely has a lot to offer. It's probably not my favourite episode of all time, but that being said, it works well. Oh, and I forgot to mention Joey's smile frown thing. When Ross is on the balcony, Joey says that he can tell Ross is smiling. And obviously the others are like, what are you talking about? He has his back to us. So Joey stands up and he smiles, frowns, smiles, frowns. And Ross comes off the phone and turns around, and all he can see through the window is Joey doing that. And Ross's facial expression in that moment is fantastic. I forgot to write that down in my notes, but definitely a highlight from this episode. It's a great episode, definitely moves things forward in a lot of ways, and ultimately, I can't fault it.